What's up, guys? Welcome to Dynasty Drip. Today, we got Andy back on the channel. We are doing a Dynasty Trades show. Before we get into that, though, Andy, it's been, 3-4 weeks since you've been on the channel. How you been doing? Anything fun recently in your life?
It's been a hot minute. I mean, I think the most fun I've had was putting together a shed in the backyard, which is, about as fun as it gets. So just loving it. Nothing like some hot black plastic on a 90-degree sunshiny day, just sweating and sweating. So
couple light beers thrown in there.
You got to stay hydrated. That is very important to stay hydrated when you're building a shed. Get the creativity.
I will say, though, what happens when the shed is done is a great feeling.
Yes.
That is a good feeling.
Yes, and we are just about there. Had to do some, maybe made a few problems, reading some directions, maybe a couple little errors in there. So I had to problem solve, and now it's the door's on, the walls are up. So we're feeling pretty good.
I dare you to find me a person that hasn't made an IKEA mistake. I know I have put something in backwards and had to figure it out from there.
So. Oh, yeah. Because, I was taking everything apart at that point. When you're so far in, it's like that's not really an option anymore.
But on today's show, Andy and I are basically just going to give you some dynasty trades. These are not necessarily buys, they're not necessarily sells. These are just 8 trades we're trying to make this year, or 8 players. We're actually going to get some bonus trades from Andy for each of these players. But we're going to kick it off with Andy, and Andy's going to go over some trades involving Baker Mayfield. Andy, I'm going to give you the floor. You set me up on which trade you want to talk about, and we'll get that up on the screen for you. But Baker Mayfield, man, I don't know if you've been watching the channel. I have talked about him a lot as well.
Oh, yeah, dude. Very pro Baker. Last year, he finished as a top 3 quarterback, tied with Joe Burrow in terms of points per game. I don't necessarily think he's going to do that this year, but I think sneaking into the top 12 is very realistic. He's got one of the best receiving cores in all of football. They add a first-round pick. I think in both Superflex and non-Superflex leagues, he is such a value. He is somewhere between quarterback 18, quarterback 15 on keep trade cut. This morning when I looked, he was 15. Yesterday when I was doing a little research, he was 18. So right in that little range where he's still pretty easy to attain, but he's going to get you fantasy points. And so, there's a few different trades that I was looking at. Just go ahead and pull one at random.
Yeah.
We'll start talking
let's start with something a little more simple. Nothing too crazy here on this one.
Yeah, so this is, I believe, is this one Superflex or this one not
Superflex?
This is Superflex. Yeah, okay, for sure. Yeah. Got more value. So, this is if you're looking to add a really solid quarterback too, maybe you only have one quarterback on your roster. I think trading, a good receiver like T. Higgins to go get a guy who is, in my opinion, going to be a low-end top 12 quarterback. I think the difference between the points that he's going to get you if you're literally working with, somebody way at the bottom of the list versus what you can maybe get out of some other guys. I mean, I do like T. Higgins, but, for Superflex, I think the value with the quarterback is just there. They've got a pretty great schedule next year. Anytime you're in the NFC South, you're going to get some pretty cush opponents. And now maybe let's bring up maybe a little controversial. This is if you're going to trade down from a stud quarterback. So this would be giving away Josh Allen, which seems impossible. And I think it's very team dependent. If you have a good quarterback room in a Superflex league, you've got, other guys you can kind of plug and play in addition to Baker, then and you have holes throughout the rest of your team. Like you don't have an RB1, you have a good team the rest of the way. I think the point difference between Baker and Josh Allen is going to be less than the point difference between Gibbs and like a running back 30 if you've got to start them. I mean, you look at, I think Gibbs between him and the running back 4, or not running back 4, between him and the running back 24 last year, it was an 8-point per game difference. Obviously Josh Allen and Baker very close, but I would expect maybe 5-point difference in terms of points per game. So just an interesting way to go about it. You definitely want to be getting a premium on top of Baker for Josh Allen. So I wouldn't be, just making this move. But if you can get an absolute stud in addition to Baker for one of those top quarterbacks, I think that's an interesting move if your team needs that extra piece somewhere else.
Yeah, I'm from looking at that trade, and I'm now like trying to like create a team where I would make that trade. It is hard. I am saying I'm having a hard time finding the exact team, but maybe like if all you have is Josh Allen, you break him down into Baker and Gibbs, you're now kind of, I can almost see that one as well. Whereas you were kind of taking you have the rest of your team, but you need the running back. And I'm thinking like, what if you only have Josh Allen? Like, what if you basically took over a team, you have nothing, and then you have Josh Allen? Maybe you break him into Baker and Gibbs. Maybe you then move Gibbs. You have Baker now, who might rise in value. Then you move him. But just to cap off our Baker Mayfield talk here, bring up your last trade. This is a Baker trade in non-super flex. I mean, obviously at this point in Dynasty, I would say 80% of leagues, if not higher, seem to be super flex, but I would say there's probably a larger portion of people that actually do play in these 1 QB leagues that are just like 9 years old. I mean, that's the league we're in, where our first Dynasty league is 1 QB. And at this point, I kind of actually really like having one that's like that. Walk us through this trade kind of from the eyes of a 1 QB league owner.
I think if you just, need a quarterback that you can play, you don't have a stud quarterback. I mean, I'm in in our Dynasty league, I was looking for a quarterback for a little bit, thinking about, do I go after a Hurts? But the price for those guys, it's like, I have to give up one of my stud wide receivers. And if we got 3 or 4 wide receiver spots, multiple flex spots, because it's a 10-team league, and it's like, I just don't want to pay that difference. Whereas Baker, he's going to, not be maybe the very high end, even though he was last year, but still be a very solid guy. And then if you have a really good team around him, that's great. So, I mean, trading wide receiver 38, like a fringe in terms of value, wide receiver 3 for a guy that I'm happy to throw in my lineup pretty much every week, I think is just a great way to round out your team.
Yeah. I mean, I think in a 1 QB league, like there's going to be a lot of teams that you would straight up just be playing Baker Mayfield more than you're playing Ayuk, which is the exact situation you're describing. It's just like, if you don't really need Ayuk, who's a guy, I don't know, I wouldn't say I'm out on Ayuk. I'm not the highest on him. But in your scenario, I mean, I really don't think it's that crazy. Let's say you've been riding Aaron Rodgers in a 1 QB league for his whole career. And you're just like, well, it's 1 QB. I don't need to add guys. Like, I got Aaron Rodgers, whatever. And then you finally took a chance. You tried to add someone a couple years ago. You drafted Trey Lance. Now, then you drafted Anthony Richardson, and you're just like, dude, I need something. Like, I need something in this quarterback room. Baker Mayfield's the guy. He kind of is that player. I did a video the other day where I was talking about some guys to kind of invest in and contender buys, and kind of the guys I described on some of these guys we talked about. For example, I used James Conner. And James Conner to me was like a guy he's the lowest ranked running back that I feel could maybe still be like a good RB1. And I feel like Baker's kind of that guy where he's one of the lower QBs that's still not like old, but could be a top 8 guy. Like he could legitimately be a top 8.
Yeah, I mean, he was last year. So it's very possible.
Exactly. And he
got top 3 last year.
Emeka Egbuka added to his team. Yeah. And he has Jaylen McMillan, Godwin, Evans. Like, it's not super crazy, but we're going to move on. We're going to talk about my first trade of the day. And I'm going to start out with my spiciest one, because this was the one I first looked at when I was writing down my list here. And we're going to talk about Tucker Kraft for me. Tucker Kraft is a guy that I think is in the perfect position to maybe tear down from one of the rookie tight ends into Tucker Kraft, if you can get a first-round pick on top of that. And what I mean by that, I'm going to bring this trade up here with Tucker Kraft. If I can get Tucker Kraft in a first by giving a Tyler Warren and a second, I would do this trade. Now, obviously, I think you're going to need to add something to the Warren side to get this done, which is why I'm comfortable giving a second next year to get Kraft in a first. But I think I would even basically do this trade with Loveland as well. I'm a little more scared to do it with Loveland, though, I would say, which is why I used Tyler Warren, just because I'm a little concerned that if the Bears click, Loveland could be a monster, where I don't necessarily know how well this year specifically is going to go for Warren. I think he could be a great asset moving forward. But as we just had, and I'll pull it up again just so you guys can see it again, Tyler Warren currently ranks the tight end 4 on Keep Trade Cut.
Wild.
Unless, what does he have to do to go up this year? What, he's not going to pass Brock Bowers, and he's not going to pass McBride. So he would basically have to do Laporta's rookie season then to even pass Laporta, I think. So, I mean, I don't really see him moving up, which is why my concern is that he may slip a couple spots. So it's not that I don't believe in Warren long-term. I just think for the value, if you can get a first and then still get a guy in Tucker Kraft who, I would not be surprised come the end of the season, you look down and Tucker Kraft is tight end 6, tight end 7, where Tyler Warren could easily be tight end 14. And it doesn't mean he's not going to get better, but I don't know if those values are going to work in your favor if you can get that first round pick in addition.
For sure. I mean, especially, we've been spoiled with Bowers and Laporta where they came out the rookie year and were monsters, but then the number 2 tight end on the board, Trey McBride, didn't really do much. He didn't really do a lot his rookie year. It was year 2 when he broke out, which is a little bit more standard for tight ends. So Warren will have the opportunities, but like you said, that offense, not looking like the hottest passing offense right now. And so, I don't, it'd be pretty incredible to see a season where he does move up in value and very realistic for him to go down. Whereas you don't have to tell me about, it's over here, how much I love Tucker Kraft. So I'll just let you do the talking because I might be a little biased. I like
Andy
it.
gave me his list of players. There weren't any current Packers on it. And I was like, I got to put a Packer in here then. Because we have in our contract, if we don't talk about a Packer, Andy does not have to come on the show. Ever. And that's our rule. But to use your example with Trey McBride, I think it's perfect. Yes, in a perfect world, if you drafted Trey McBride, you held him all the way, you're stoked. Mm-hmm. You're stoked. You got exactly what you wanted. But there's also a world where you traded for him after his rookie year, got him for cheaper than he was drafted for. You now have him, and you're even more stoked because you didn't have to spend a late first a couple of years ago to get him. You traded a second and a third, and the dude just got rid of McBride because he's not even playing. Mm-hmm. So I think that's kind of the Tyler Warren thing where it's if you're in on Tyler Warren, I think you go get him when it looks a little ugly. You don't go get him when he's tight end 4. You move him when he's tight end 4. That's when you move him. Because I just don't really know how much higher he can go up here. But we're going to move on to Andy's next player. And the reason I said current Packer, so there is a former Packer on here as well. Andy, talk me through Davante Adams. Let me know which trades to bring up. He was actually on the cover of my buy episode a couple episodes ago. So I'm hoping you're talking about acquiring Adams, unless I'm just going to have to crap all over your take here.
No, but I think we're very much on the same page here. He still looked like a superstar last year. Just how he moves and how he plays the position. Just go watch every catch he had week 15 against the Jags. It's the Jags, but just the way he was moving, the way he was catching, 198 yards, still an absolute monster. He's 32. He's getting older. He finished wide receiver 10 in points per game, which is a little crazy despite being on the abysmal Raiders and the very dysfunctional Jets. But now he gets to be in the McVay scheme where he's got Matthew Stafford thrown to him. There's another very talented wide receiver there. This should be a really good offense. He should have opportunity. In redraft, I see him as kind of a low-end wide receiver 1. So if you are a contending team, you can buy him real cheap. I say go ahead, pull up any one of those trades.
So we're going to pull up the first one here. It looks like using picks to get Adams onto your team.
Yeah, right now, value a late second and kind of a throw-in player. If you could do a second and a third, I think that'd be a fine way to do it too. Maybe start a second and a 4. They say no, you go second and a 3. But I think the value he's going to give you this year will be worth that shot if you're ready to take the next step. And, it is scary. Sometimes wide receivers fall off cliffs when they get into their early 30s, but then there's other guys like Larry Fitzgerald who kept being very productive well into his 30s. So we'll see what happens with Davante. I think it's worth the risk. I think he's going to be good this year. I wouldn't be surprised if he's still decent next year. And for such a low price, I think that's worth it for, this championship window that he gives you on your team.
So let's talk through this one. This is more of a contender buy. It looks like we're acquiring Adams and Mike Evans. Where you at on this one,
Andy? This is, just another way to approach it as a contender. If maybe you traded your picks, you really don't want to give up your picks, whatever it is, I would be in redraft probably starting Adams and Evans over T. Higgins a lot of weeks. It's fairly close, I think, with Higgins and Evans, but you're getting two very good wide receivers for probably at least a year. For a guy who I like, I feel a little bit bad that I have T. Higgins in both my tradeaways. I don't feel that strongly about trading.
I was going to say, dude, was the message here you don't like T. Higgins?
I think I'm just valuing players in units of T. Higgins. That's the basis I'm going off of, apparently. He's wide receiver 18, which is the perfect middle wide receiver 2. So you can go a little up or down from there. So I'm not hating on T. Higgins. I like T. Higgins.
Yeah. I mean, to go off what you were saying, I would even – I'm going to pull up your Adams trade here with Tucker in a second. As an example, when I was pitching trading for Adams as a contender last week, I think it was last Monday on my video – it was one of my favorite videos I do, which is players I'm willing to overpay for. And I was even saying in this instance, take your least favorite or a guy who's going in the late second of drafts right now, use him and maybe a future third, a future second, and be like, dude, I will overpay if I want Adams, because I don't dislike Bashal Tutin and a future second, but I'm playing Adams every week, and I don't know what's going to happen with a Tutin, or I don't know what's going to happen with I don't know. I mean, I think the late second's kind of where that starts to happen to me, where it's like, I don't know if I would trade an early second. I'm not going to trade a Jaylen Higgins and a second for Adams, because I think there's a little more stuff there. But, like Kyle Williams in a second, if you're trying to win, I would do that. Of course, you're risking that Kyle Williams becomes something, but, you can't win both sides of every trade. It's very difficult to play that game. And I think when you're a contender, you kind of have to be okay, like what you were saying with your trade Evans and Adams for T. Higgins, where it's like, if you need that wide receiver 3, let's say you have one good wide receiver and then you have T. Higgins, it's like, well, if you have Derrick Henry, you're stacked at quarterback, and you have George Kittle, and it's like, dude, maybe it does make sense. It might suck in 3 years, but if you take the ship down, it's totally worth it. But
I would trade every player on my team to win a championship. So
yeah. I mean, 100% winning. If you win once every 10 years, you're winning at a higher clip probably than a majority of your league. So since we're on the topic of kind of, contender buys and stuff, I'm going to talk about a player who I think might have a good little window to buy him in the next little bit, and that's going to be Joe Mixon. Don't get me wrong when I'm talking about this. Basically, the reason I think there might be a window to buy Joe Mixon is the Nick Chubb signing. And don't get me wrong, I love Nick Chubb. I've loved Nick Chubb for so long. I had him on one of our OG Dynasty teams, and when he hurt his knee, dude, it crushed my sometimes when your players get hurt in fantasy, you're like, oh, that sucks, dude. And then you go on with your life, right? Dude, I sat there for 5 days just being like, dude, that was so sad. Just the clip. I couldn't get the clip of his knee just buckling back out of my head because it was so brutal. And Nick Chubb is just the heart
and life out of that team.
Of a team. Of my team, too. He was that's how I was playing. But let's be realistic. Most likely, he just is not going to have the burst or the skill. And even though they signed him, I'm going to follow the money, which was $2 million guaranteed. it's Rico Dowdle numbers. That's what Rico Dowdle got. So like, I'm not scared of if Rico Dowdle signed in Houston, I would not be scared. So to me, it's like, even if Joe Mixon, maybe he takes a 10% cut to some of his carries. But Joe Mixon has a chance to just be on fire again. I think we're remembering the end of his season last year, and we were forgetting he was the RB1 through like 5 weeks of the season, basically. So my trade here, I'd be willing to trade Josh Downs to get Joe Mixon onto my team. I could see maybe doing this trade in the other way if you're a rebuilder. Me personally, Josh Downs is not a guy I'm targeting at the moment. I do think he's a very good wide receiver, to be honest. I just, similar to Tyler Warren, with if it's Anthony Richardson or if it's Daniel Jones or who really knows, I don't really know if those wide receivers are going to increase in value in this year. And that would be my worry with Josh Downs, that he somehow is kind of just kept rising up the ranks because Pittman was hurt and now Pittman's hurt again. And so like, I think it's just because Pittman's been dropping that Josh Downs has been moving up, but it really hasn't been for any other reason, because Josh Downs was really only good when Flacco was throwing him the ball. It's not that he's been putting up these monster numbers. But Andy, what are your thoughts on Mixon and Josh Downs in this instance?
No, I like this, especially, if you're going out for a running back and you're a contender. I'm a big fan of Mixon. He put up so many points last year. Love Nick Chubb to death, but coming off that injury, new team, like you said, I don't see him as too much of a threat to kind of do a lot of Mixon's time. And I do like Downs. He's got some potential. I know his reception perception just came out and had very, very high marks there. So his market might be going up, actually, when more people take a look at that. But the quarterback situation there is so tough, where even if he is a good player, it's going to take some time to realize that value. Whereas if you're trying to win right now, Joe Mixon will be scoring a lot of points. So
honestly, he might have like risen up like 5 points probably because of Matt Harmon. That's actually very possible. That is one of the few people that could actually like influence someone's ranking to that degree, to be honest. But next guy Andy's going to talk about is Brian Thomas, and a couple trades here involving Brian Thomas. So Andy, what are you trying to do with Brian Thomas in this Dynasty offseason?
I just want to say I love Brian Thomas Jr. I think he's a great receiver, and he has a great career ahead of him, but he is wide receiver 5. And I think a lot of like what we talked about with Tyler Warren, I kind of see it with Brian Thomas, where will he be able to make it to that Jamar Chase, Justin Jefferson tier? Because he's number 5. He's one of the most, sought after wide receivers in fantasy football right now. And he had a great season. He was wide receiver 12 in points per game. I would not be surprised if he's still a number 1 wide receiver this year, but they did also add Travis Hunter, who they invested a lot more capital in. So if they're a 1A, 1B, maybe it cuts into Brian Thomas. Maybe it really doesn't, but I don't see how he's going to make that step to be, the wide receiver 2 overall. Maybe he goes over CeeDee Lamb and is wide receiver 4, but I do see a lot of scenarios where he drops down to wide receiver 10 or 11 because there's, Marvin Harrison Jr. There's a lot of other good young wide receivers in the league. I mean, Amon-Ra's under him right now. And just a lot of guys I like in that tier that I think are a little bit safer, that you could maybe flip him. And I'd say either go try and get somebody kind of in that tier, or because his value is so high, package him up and try and move up. So yeah, this is just, maybe it's just me personally, where I think I would rather have Amon-Ra St. Brown. Obviously Brian Thomas is a little bit younger, but
would you do this straight as a question, just so everyone?
I personally would. Like, if I was in a startup draft, I would draft Amon-Ra before Brian Thomas Jr. And I like him a lot. I think he belongs in the same tier as those guys. I just think his value is at kind of the pinnacle. And even if it does go up a little bit higher, then there's only the ceiling is right there. He's in the clouds, which is great. That's where you want your wide receivers to be. But he can also come back down just a little bit. I don't know if he's going to push the stratosphere. So And then the other way to do it would be to take him and try and move up and go get a Justin Jefferson, a Jamar Chase, maybe a Malik Neighbors, one of those guys who is in a situation where they are for sure the wide receiver one, especially Jefferson and Chase. They've proven year in and year out that they are that elite difference maker at the position. And, use him as he's wide receiver 5. This is, one of the players where you might be able to go get a Justin Jefferson if a team has a need in another spot and be like, hey, wide receiver 5 for wide receiver 2, like plus you get, a starting running back or another starting wide receiver or an asset for your team. So I like Brian Thomas Jr. a lot. I just feel it could be a little risky where his value is. And I would be trying to maybe move him for one of these other assets.
Yeah, I definitely like the idea. I think just like everyone watching, Andy and I run some of our players by each other before every show, just so that we're not doubling up. But we really basically just do let each other, we do agree a lot of times, but also sometimes it's just like we come up with our own ideas and then we kind of put them together on the show because we like to have some like genuine stuff. And the horizontal one is interesting. I think, like you said, I guess I might take Amon-Ra before Brian Thomas. I really hadn't been on the clock in that situation. I think for me, though, if I'm trying to move Brian Thomas, exactly what you did here with James Cook, which is a player I was talking about selling, is I'm going to try to tier up from Brian Thomas because just like you said, he is one of those maybe, I don't know, 10 names as a positional player. Let's take QBs out for a second. He's one of those 5 to 10 names that you have to include to get a Justin Jefferson or a Jamar Chase if you're not throwing 4 firsts at someone. Unless you're going to throw just a crazy number of first-round picks at someone, you kind of have to have a Brian Thomas to get up there. And like you said, like I don't know how he gets above Chase, Jefferson, or Neighbors. I guess if he's wide receiver 1, that's the way. I think if he is wide receiver 1, I could see him sliding up, and that's probably the only way. Because I think there's going to be, even if he beats out Chase, I wouldn't take him just because of the Burrow Chase connection. I wouldn't ever rise him there. I think Jefferson's too safe. Jefferson is getting older, I guess, but I don't know. I'm not super concerned, to be honest. So I think that is an interesting one. And I think this is an experiment that we've seen with other players in the last 5 to 10 years, that 80% of the time, if you think a player is at peak value, usually it is a smart time to trade them. One that's coming to mind for me that just probably was crushing if you held was Cam Akers. Cam Akers, remember, what was it, like 4 years ago, he was RB5? He was a top 6-7 guy. And if you had sat there on that day and been, what has to happen for Akers to go up? As long as you got market value for RB5, I think that's the thing. And that's kind of what you're saying is you can trade Brian Thomas if it's for market value or whatever. Like, you don't have to be like, dude, Brian Thomas sucks, man. Can you give me a Ted McMillan? It's like, no. Like, we're not.
Not a chance. I don't think he's a great wide receiver. I think he's going to be good for fantasy. If he's on my team, I'm happy with keeping him. But I think there's some slightly safer options and opportunities to kind of, just in case.
We're going to move in to my next player. I'm going to throw a quarterback on here to match Andy's Baker, and someone that is much better than Baker in Daniel Jones. Now, he's not.
Course.
Just back off of my take there. He's not better.
He's faster. He's faster than Baker.
He's faster, and he's better at tripping.
Yeah.
And he did win me a dynasty championship, whereas I did not own Baker. So 1-0 Daniel Jones in a way. But what I like about Daniel Jones right now, and I don't know how you feel, I think the writing is almost on the wall that Daniel Jones might just start the season for the Colts. I mean, I haven't heard a good thing about Anthony Richardson in a long time. He's hurt again. So Daniel Jones is going to be, in training camp, learning the plays. And also, I think something that matters more than people think is that the Colts did win like the bidding war for Daniel Jones. Like he wanted to go to Minnesota. I think Minnesota wanted him, but the Colts just paid more because I think they kind of want him to be the starter in a way. Now, maybe this is reading the tea leaves a little too much.
Mm-hmm.
But to me, the trade I'm bringing up here is like, dude, this is valuing Daniel Jones as like a 3rd round pick. Like, yeah. I'm sorry, but like, even if you don't like the guy, buy Daniel Jones if this is the price.
For sure.
I understand not trading like a second or something because you're like, well, sometimes in the 2nd round, a Jackson Dart slips to you. And you're like, well, thank God I didn't trade that 26 second because I got next year's Jackson Dart or something. I get that. Like, I'm not saying go trade a valuable, super valuable asset, but anything after like 3-1 and on, or players worth a 3rd or something, Daniel Jones is a very good investment on that asset because all that needs to happen. And I've talked about this probably for about 2 months too, with another player being Tyler Shuck, the quarterback on the Saints. I just didn't want to use him in this video because I've mentioned him multiple times, but Shuck's kind of going around that same range too. He's going in that early 3rd range. And the thing is, all it takes is one tweet that says Daniel Jones is the starter and his value just goes up. I'm not saying he's going to be like quarterback 5, but one piece of news could make him go up. And even if it's not for week 1, it's going to happen, guys. Anthony Richardson is going to get benched, or he's just going to lose the job, or he's going to get hurt, or whatever. I saw a story today that I think it was on Colin Cowherd's show, and it was someone at Fox talking about how Anthony Richardson is destined to be the next quarterback for the Steelers next year as they just recycle another terrible player from another team. And it's like, it's kind of silly, but like, it kind of seems to be the path that he's on right now. I don't know. Like, am I crazy here? Or is it just like, even if you don't like the player, I think you have to like the value it to some degree.
It just makes me so sad because last offseason, I was very much into Anthony Richardson. I loved what I saw in those few games that he played. How he threw his body around like a wild animal and was running in for touchdowns, scored fantasy points. And then the season started and those hopes and dreams all came crashing down when he played for most of the season. So I'm kind of with you. There definitely will be a point in the season where Danny Dimes is the starting quarterback. And especially in Superflex, anytime you have a starting quarterback, if you want to keep him, if then you're trying to trade him to a team, his value is only going to go up. Doesn't matter if they're an amazing starting quarterback, they are a starting quarterback. So, yeah, I mean, for that price, I think, his risk is a lot safer than a lot of any random 3rd round pick that you're going to be drafting. So I'm on board with that.
I feel like he's kind of on this path where last year I said, honestly, sometimes I say smart things. Sometimes I say stupid things. One thing I said about I honestly would love to go find the video. I said this about Justin Fields, and I think it was very astute, and I think it needs to apply to a lot more players in Dynasty. What I said about Justin Fields was, when Justin Fields wins the job, you trade him, and when he loses the job, you trade for him. And what I mean is that his value that's the value. It's the value up and down of a player where it's like, you don't, sometimes you can play Dynasty like a game in a way. It's not necessarily the same, but we're going to move into Andy's last player for the day. Old standby at running back for the Detroit Lions, our boy, David Montgomery, half of the Sonic and Knuckles duo.
Yeah. And, I do love David Montgomery. He finished his RB13 in points per game last year. He's on one of the best offenses in football. And kind of like Brian Thomas Jr., it's not that I don't want him on my team. It's just there's other guys I like more around him. And I think it's going to be harder and harder for the Lions to take Gibbs off the field. There's definitely going to still be a role for Monty, but there's other 28-year-old running backs like Alvin Kamara, like Joe Mixon, that I like more. Or, a Tyreek Hill, a Davante Adams, if you're looking for an old vet on a contending team. Unless Gibbs gets injured, I don't think there's a world where David Montgomery is a RB1. I think he's very safe in an RB2 territory. I don't think he's going to be nothing, but I think you look at Kamara, you look at Mixon, you look at Adams, you look at some of these Tyreek Hill, where they're all valued around the same. And those guys have every opportunity to be a wide receiver 1 or a very high end 2 or an RB1. So I think they have similar floors and these other guys just have a higher ceiling. So I like him, but I just like other guys more. So like if you've got an older team, you're trying to rebuild a little bit, you can package Monty and maybe a pick, go get somebody like Zay Flowers, try a high-end wide receiver, or I guess a low-end wide receiver 2, to get a little bit younger, or, trade him straight up for a Joe Mixon or an Alvin Kamara. If, see if there's a Lions fan in your league and somebody likes him. I would just be looking to move him for a player with a little bit more upside. So yeah, there you go. Baker Mayfield. If you need a quarterback in Superflex, pair him up with somebody and then boom, you got yourself a great value at quarterback. So I like Monty. I just, there's other guys with bigger ceilings right next to him in value.
I think his value is like almost kind of like you look at his value and you're like, yeah, I guess that's his value. Like he really is one of those guys where it's like, what you're getting with Monty. I don't think he's trying to trick you. I don't think if you trade for Monty, if someone traded for Monty for a specific reason, and you got him for the price you liked. Yeah. I think it's probably a fair price too. But like you said, I think the way you're phrasing it, and to me, what's clicking is like, okay, if you're rebuilding, use Monty and invest in a younger wide receiver. Can you use Monty in a pick to get exactly Zay Flowers? Can you use Monty in a pick to get Jordan Addison, a guy I love his value of right now? Mm-hmm. Or if you're trying to win, then don't use Monty. Can we use Monty in that pick to get Derrick Henry? Can we use Monty? Yeah. Like he's kind of this weird in between where it's like, for me, I think I have David Montgomery on one team, and he is my RB4. He's a great RB4. He's a great RB3. I think if you're looking for an RB2, though, I would aim higher. And I think that's the way you're phrasing it is like, go for Joe Mixon. Even if you think you're getting a year less out of Mixon, it's a higher 2 years, whereas Monty gives you RB18, RB19, RB20. Mixon could give you 10, 15, he's out of the league. Or something or whatever, right? I think
that's a great way to phrase
it. Yeah, and this trade right here, I'm going to bring up. You want to know how to rebuild in Dynasty in a nutshell? That trade there. Do not be afraid to move your third-round picks on top of players to accomplish your goal. What we've talked about, this is something, 9 years ago, I think one of the first lessons I learned and taught myself in Dynasty was never have a third-round pick be the reason the trade did not get done. Unless it's for like a crap player that you wouldn't even pay a third for. I understand that. But if it's a legitimate trade that you think is part of the vision for your team, never let a third-round pick get in the way of that trade happening. So I'm going to wrap up the show. I'm going to be quick. I have 2 more guys. They're both going to be very fast trades. I'm not going to over talk about this next player, and I'm just bring him up on the screen because I've talked about him a couple times. But Calvin Ridley is underrated right now. The fact that they got the number 1 pick on their team is not being baked into Calvin Ridley's upside for me personally. I think a lot of people are looking at the Titans as last year's Titans. And then I think a lot of people also just look at the 30 next to Calvin Ridley's age and assume he's like he's not a normal 30-year-old. He came into the league late. He took some time off. I don't think he has the hits a normal 30-year-old would have. It would not surprise me if Calvin Ridley is a wide receiver 2 or a wide receiver 3 for the next 2 years. I'm not aiming farther than that,
Yeah.
I would say the Titans' best offensive weapon is probably not on the team yet. If for Cam Ward's future, I think there's someone in the future that's going to be that player. But Calvin Ridley finished higher than this last year with Will Levis, dude. And Will Levis is arguably worse than Anthony Richardson, because at least Anthony Richardson didn't throw game-losing interceptions like 5 times. So I don't know. And then the second one, I'm going to bring this up, and then we'll let Andy comment on both of these. I just think Jaylen Wright is being a little underrated right now. He's basically being valued lower than he was last year, but the Dolphins got rid of Raheem Mostert. So I think there was just less bodies in that running back room. And I'm not saying Jaylen Wright's going to take the job from Achane, but a phrase I've been really liking to use, I don't remember what podcast I initially heard this phrase on. I think it was JJ Zachariason might have said it. He used the phrase contingent upside for certain players. And what I mean about that is not only does Jaylen Wright potentially hold some flex value, because we've seen the Dolphins use 2 backs, so he could find some value in that way, but also he has the contingent value of Achane going down and him potentially being a league winner. And so I just don't think that is even being baked in. So even if you're not trying to get Wright as I'm not saying you're trading for Jaylen Wright expecting to play him every week, but this is a very fair price for the RB2 on a team. There are a lot of people above Jaylen Wright that I'm telling you you're going to look at and you're going to be like, yeah, I think I'd take Jaylen Wright, actually. Like, you start going up that list, and it kind of does happen. But, Andy, what are your thoughts on Calvin Ridley and Jaylen Wright to finish the show?
Yeah, I like both those guys. I mean, Calvin Ridley, best friends with Cam Ward. So, we've already got that connection. Remember Cam Ward talking about that a lot in the pre-draft interviews. I think just, for the price on a contending team, he's going to pay back that value with what you got to pay for Calvin Ridley. It's about all I have to say about him. And then as far as Jaylen Wright, I'm going to go try and trade for Jaylen Wright in some leagues right now. And I hope you don't have them and all the ones that we're in.
I don't really have them. Let's be honest.
It's going to be a race. As soon as we hang up, we're both going to be sending offers. But yeah, like you said, the opportunity is the second guy there. He is, at least on their depth chart, RB2 right now. They paid, was it a 3rd round pick for him? So they invested.
He was drafted fairly high. And he was, he was taken as a 2nd round pick last year. And he didn't see the field a ton, but when he did, I wouldn't say he looked bad. I just think Achane looked very special. So
yes, exactly. And, they have formations where they put Achane in the slot. Could I see, 2 running backs on the field a little bit more this year? Maybe, now that he's got his feet wet in the league, he's 210 pounds and still runs a 4.38 40. So he's got that speed that they like, and definitely a lot bigger than Achane. So, like you said, if something happens to Achane, he's got opportunity, but I think he's just got opportunity to be that solid RB2 in that offense. And he's going to get more carries this year for sure than he did last year. And being the bigger guy, we'll see if he's used more around the goal line. And for a low end RB4 price, I think he's worth it if he doesn't even hit the upside almost. And then you have this, great upside with him there too. So I'd very much be willing to pay that price.
Like there's honestly a chance that you could trade Ollie Gordon, who's probably going to be the running back 3 on the Dolphins, for Jaylen Wright, just because Ollie Gordon is a rookie. With that being the only reason, just because people love rookies. Like, that's literally it. There's nothing more to it. Sometimes Dynasty is a lot simpler than you think. If things click in the right way, every once in a while we have those trades in leagues where you send it over, you're like, hey man, you want to do this? I'm like, yeah, that's actually great for me. You're like, perfect. Here you go.
Yeah. Easy. Cool. The best one.
But Andy, thanks for coming on for a little Dynasty Trades show, dude. Love Dynasty Trades. We both do. It's the beauty of this sport. Any last things you want to say before we sign off for the day?
Hey, all your rookie drafts probably wrapped up, but good luck anybody out there getting ready for startup draft season. So
yeah, it's startup draft season, man. All the content on the channel, these trades. I would say in general, if we are viewing a player as a good value, it's very, very likely they're a good value in startup drafts as well. And make sure to check out all the other videos on the channel. I've been starting to incorporate some ADP data as well. So make sure to check out, especially the most recent couple videos. If you guys are doing startups, been throwing some ones out there, especially the video from Monday this week, something for sure. But if you liked what you saw here, like the video, shoot me a subscribe. Andy, thanks for coming on, man. And we'll catch you guys soon.